Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our second episode of Wake Up Church, Learning to Walk in Your Identity. Today, we're going to take a look at another mighty hero of old, and that is Joshua. You know, I'm just recently being led to and loving the stories of these mighty warriors of the Old Testament, like Gideon and Joshua, because I think God is looking at his church today and just looking for somebody, some people, some remnant, some men, some women who are wanting to stand up and stand in the gap and be mighty heroes of the faith. So today we're going to take a look at Joshua because I think there's some things that we can learn from his life and his experiences that can help us learn to walk in our identity as mighty heroes of the faith. If you have your Bible, go ahead and grab it. We are going to be taking a look at a few different passages today. We are going to start in Joshua chapter 1. And of course, that book is named after Joshua, the mighty hero. And the book of Joshua covers about a 25-year history of Joshua leading the Israelite people into the promised land, into the promise that God has given them, and conquering the people groups that are in there. So we're just going to take a look at a few verses in chapter 1. So if you want to join me, turn to Joshua chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. Now listen to the next three verses 3 through 5. There's some beautiful promises in here. I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land I have given you. From the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. For I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you nor abandon you. Well, that right there is just a word in itself. Beautiful promises that God is giving to Joshua before he walks into this battle. Now, verses 6 through 9, it will finish with these in Joshua, are the commands that God gives to Joshua. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors that I would give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. And catch this. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. And then he finishes with this. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Oh my gosh, those promises that he gives Joshua. And then he gives him the recipe for being successful, which is just study the book of instruction, which would have been the first few books of the Old Testament for Joshua. Do not deviate from it. to the right or left. Stay on it. Well, Joshua, by this time in his life, with what the Lord is putting on him to do, Joshua definitely has some weight-bearing capacity. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, God's putting a big thing on Joshua to do. He's giving him a large task. You're going to take these people that Moses was leading, and you're going to take them into that land, and you're going to conquer it, and I'm going to be with you, and wherever you set your foot, I'm going to give it to you. Whoa. Now keep in mind, Joshua's probably about 80 years old when he gets to this point, and God gives him this command. But God knows he's ready. And Joshua was a very effective military commander. We know that by looking at past experiences. But more than that, Joshua was a man of great faith and great obedience. How did he get there? How did he get to this point where God could put that task on him? I think there are some lessons that we can learn and that we can use in our own lives. But we got to go back in the story. So if you'll follow me back in the story before this point, let's see some of the things and the experiences that Joshua went through to get to this point. If you want to turn to Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, the fourth book in the Old Testament, chapter 14, verses 6 through 10. Now, this is also a very famous story. This is 40 years earlier, so we suspect Joshua was, maybe around 40 years old. It was a story where God had sent the 12 spies. Well, he told Moses to send 12 spies into the land of Canaan, scope it out, and come back and give their report. So the 12 spies go in, and they come back and give the report to Moses and to the people of Israel. And remember, 10 of them, remember the old song, 10 were bad and 2 were good. 10 of them said, oh, we can't do it. We can't take that land. Oh my gosh, yes, it's a wonderful land. The crops are wonderful. It's bountiful. It's fruitful. But there's giants. There's giants all over the place. But there's 2 guys, Joshua and Caleb. And they tell a different story. So if you look in Numbers 14, starting with chapter 6, 2 of the men who had explored the land, Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, tore their clothing. They said to all the people of Israel, the land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They're only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. So we see that 40 years earlier, Joshua had come to this place already, where he had established in his mind that he had a great faith in his God, because he and Caleb said, they're nothing to us. Those giants, they're nothing to us. The Lord is with us. Just like you and I should be saying today when we're looking at the evil around us in the world. We're thinking, that is nothing to our God. We serve a God who is a God of the impossible. Something can look impossible to us in the natural, but to God, in a moment, he can change all of it. So we have to be a people of great faith, just like Joshua was. How did he get that way? Well, he had seen the things that God had done. He had come out of Egypt when Moses led them out. He had seen the parting of the Red Sea. He had seen the manna from heaven. He had seen the supernatural provision of water coming from the rock, but so had all the other people. So what was it about Joshua? What was it about him that gave him this great faith and this great obedience? Well, let's go back. We got to go back further in the story. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17. Now, in Exodus chapter 17, the Israelites have come out of Egypt, okay? They've crossed through the Red Sea. They're in the wilderness. They've already complained about being hungry and God sent manna. They've already complained about being thirsty, so God provided water. Well, now they're getting attacked. The first group of people to attack them were the Amalekites. The Amalekites. And this is the battle that takes place in chapter 17 of Exodus, where some of you have probably heard the story where God told Moses, as long as you hold up your arms, the Israelite people will have victory over the Amalekites. But if you put your arms down, then they will start losing. So as long as Moses had his arms in the sky, they were winning the battle. Well, his arms got tired, so Aaron held up one arm and Hur found a stone for him to sit on and held up the other arm. And Joshua was the one leading the Israelites into battle. So Moses is up watching the battle. They're helping hold his arms up. And of course, the Israelites have victory. Well, there's a very, I think, interesting phrase in verse 14 of chapter 17. After the victory, the Lord instructed Moses, write this down on a scroll as a permanent reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nisi, which means the Lord is my banner. You know, no words are ever wasted in the Bible. In other words, they don't just put filler in there. Well, we'll just add this in to fluff it up a little and fill it out. So that verse has significance where the Lord told Moses, I want you to write it down, but I want you to read it out loud to Joshua. Or the NIV version says, make sure Joshua hears this. The ESV version says, recite it in the ears of Joshua. So regardless of the Bible translation, it's clear that God wanted Joshua to hear from the mouth of Moses that he would erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Why do you think God would say that? Make sure Joshua hears this. Write it down, but say it to him. Do you think it was to start the building blocks of faith that God knew Joshua was going to need? Remember last week we talked about how God sees the end from the beginning and he knows where we're going to end up. So he knew the task that Joshua was going to have ahead of him when he was 80 years old. But do you think he was saying that because Joshua was going to have to know, he was going to have to remember? I think that's so crucial because at some point, Joshua was going to have to remember what the psalmist says in Psalms 121, and it's what we need to remember. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And so I think it was a building block. And I want you to stop and consider, has God used building blocks of faith for you? I think if we're going to walk into our identity and we're going to rise in this hour and stand and be counted and stand up, God knows we have to have that history with him. We have to have this, I remember when God did this. I remember when God did that. I've got those. I've got a story from today that maybe I'll share sometime. We've got to have those building blocks of faith. When God reminds us, I hear you, I see you, log this in your mind, write it on your heart, and remember it. I think that was the purpose for Joshua. Second thing I'd like to take a look at is if you would turn to Exodus, a few pages over, 24. Exodus 24. Actually, I'm going to mention a couple verses, but then we're going to move on. So I'm not going to read these to you, but my second point about walking in your identity, and I have said this before, and it's a quote I've heard Bill Johnson say, and I love it. I may not get it exactly right, but it's along the lines that if you want to kill giants, hang out with giant killers. Well, Joshua was going to have to kill giants. So who's he going to hang out with to learn, to have the faith that he needs to have? Well, he's going to hang out with Moses. We don't know the whole story of how he got chosen. We just know that by Exodus chapter 24, we are told that Joshua is the assistant of Moses. He is his assistant. And if you look at Exodus 24 through Exodus 32, that's the whole story about Moses. He's approaching the mountain, and then he's going to go up the mountain, and he's going to get the commandments. And by the time he comes back down, the Israelite people are going to have built a golden calf. That whole story. What I did not know is that Joshua went up the mountain with him. If you read, it says that the elders and the priests, and they had to stay at the bottom. And it says Moses went up. But it says in chapter 24, so Moses and his assistant Joshua set out. Now we don't know how far up the mountain Joshua went, but he stayed with Moses. Because if you look over in Exodus chapter 32, verse 17, if you want to check it out later, by the time Moses gets back down, God says, you're going to have to go back. The people have built a golden calf. They're worshiping it. Go down, deal with them. And it says in verse 17 that as they were going down, Joshua said to Moses, sounds like there's a battle in the camp. And Moses says, no, it's a celebration. But the fact is, Joshua wasn't there. He was up on the mountain with Moses. And he thought maybe there was a battle going on down there. So I find that interesting. I'd never caught that before. You want to be a giant killer? Hang out with giant killers. Who can you hang out with? Who can you hang out with today, tomorrow, in the next week, that to you in your mind is who you want to follow after? Somebody who wants to stand against the raging of the evil and stand for truth in the culture. Who can you find to hang out with, to learn from them? Somebody who wants to grow in the gifts of the Spirit. Just something to think about. As you grow into your identity, who can I have to speak into my life? Whether it's people who are physically around us or teachers we watch online. Who can speak into my life to help me grow in my identity? Okay, we're getting long on time. Hang with me. One more thing. Turn to Exodus chapter 33. And I do want to take a look at this because this is vitally important. In Exodus 33, it talks about how outside the camp of the Israelites, there was the tent of meeting. And that's where Moses would go to meet with God. It says he met face to face with God in the tent of meeting. And it says that the Israelite people would come to like the door of their tents, and they would watch as Moses went out to the tent of meeting, and they would see the cloud of the Lord descend over the tent. And then take a look at what it says in verse 8 of chapter 33. Whenever Moses went out to the tent of meeting, all the people would get up and stand in the entrances of their own tents, and they would watch as Moses disappeared inside. As he went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke to Moses. And then they would stand and bow in front of their own tents. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And that's who Joshua's hanging out with. Catch this. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. Oh, again, no wasted words. That's put there for a reason. He has been in the tent where Moses met face to face with God. Moses leaves, Joshua lingers. Have you ever just lingered in his presence? Have you ever just sat quietly to soak in his presence? You know, there are times and there are places and there are experiences where we certainly feel the presence more than other times, places, and experiences. But let me encourage you, when you find yourself in a place like that, linger in his presence. Seek his presence. Totally crucial and vital. If we're going to walk in our identity, we have to seek his presence. The other night, I was just sitting quietly and I'm thinking, Lord, what am I supposed to do? What do you want me to do? What do you have for me to do? We got to go. We got to speak into the culture. And Holy Spirit just said, just sit here with me. Just sit here quietly at the feet of Jesus and let him speak to you. So that is huge. That is totally, vitally important. Let me finish with this verse out of Psalms. I love it. I've read it before. Psalm 84:5. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. I would suggest that by the time Joshua was 80 years old and heading into that promised land, his heart had highways to Zion. He knew his God. He trusted him and he obeyed him. Let's do that today. Isn't it exciting? Isn't it so exciting to be a part of the kingdom of God? So let me encourage you this week. Walk in your identity. Seek the Lord. Trust him and have great faith. I'll see you next week. Bye.